This episode contains descriptions of stalking, coercive control, and lethal violence. Viewer discretion is advised. Molly Joanne McLaren was born in 1994 and grew up in Chatham, a village in Kent, England. From the start of her short life, she was, as her parents would later say, the light of their world, their ray of sunshine. She was raised in a close and loving home. Her father, Doug, worked in the oil industry, often away for long stretches on offshore platforms. Her mother, Jo, was devoted to her children. Molly had an older brother, Tom, and the siblings were close. The McLarens were the kind of family who backed each other unconditionally, in the way that only families who have truly been tested tend to do. As a child and teenager, Molly was gentle and sensitive, but also determined and full of warmth. She had big, bright eyes and a smile that could immediately put anyone at ease. Friends remembered her as someone who went out of her way to make others feel included, who could strike up a conversation with anyone, and who never seemed to forget the people around her. But behind that smile, there were challenges, ones that Molly would eventually transform into her greatest purpose. As a teenager, Molly struggled with bulimia. It was a painful and exhausting period of her life, marked by anxiety, physical strain, and the particular loneliness that comes from carrying something you don't know how to explain to the people who love you. But Molly didn't give up. With the support of her family and medical professionals, she fought through it. By her early 20s, she had largely overcome both the eating disorder and the anxiety that had come with it. She came out the other side with a fierce sense of what she wanted to do with her life. By 2016, Molly was 22 years old and in her second year at the University of Kent, studying sport and exercise for health. She had found a way to combine everything that mattered to her, fitness, mental well-being, self-acceptance, into a clear and purposeful career path. She wanted to help people the way she had been helped. She started a blog. She posted openly about her journey through illness and recovery. She shared tips about fitness and mental health, about balance and self-acceptance, about the possibility of coming through hard things and feeling good on the other side. Those who knew Molly described her as someone who was intelligent, kind-hearted, and genuinely enthusiastic about life. A friend who would drop everything for someone in need, a daughter who still gave her mom a hug every night before bed, a sister who cheered her brother on in everything he did. She had everything. A supportive family, a wide circle of friends, a clear direction. The only thing she felt was missing was someone to share it with. In mid-2016, she signed up for Tinder. Joshua Stimpson was 25 years old, lived in Medway, and worked as a double glazing salesman. His profile showed a friendly face. His messages were warm and attentive. When Molly and Josh started talking, she found the conversation easy and natural. He seemed genuinely interested in her life. For a few months, they messaged regularly, getting to know each other from behind their phones. Molly told her mom she was nervous about meeting him in person, the way anyone is before a first date, but also quietly hopeful. In early November 2016, after months of chatting, they finally met face to face. It went well. Josh in person was pleasant, charming even. He made Molly laugh. He listened when she talked about her coursework and her passion for fitness. He was open about certain personal things too. Early on, he mentioned that he thought he might have bipolar disorder, though it had never been formally diagnosed. Molly understood the weight that mental health struggles can carry. She was sympathetic and told her mom so. To her parents, Josh came across as a normal, if slightly quiet young man who appeared to care deeply for their daughter. To Molly's friends, she seemed happy. To everyone on the outside, this looked like a straightforward new relationship. But even in those early months, if you knew what to look for, the signs were there. Josh had virtually no social circle of his own. He never introduced Molly to any friends, never talked about people from work or from his past. He seemed to exist in a world where Molly was the only person who mattered, which sounds romantic when you're 22 and newly in love, and looks very different with hindsight. He also had a need to always be around her, and a difficulty managing it when he wasn't. Molly's mother, Jo, later recalled that when Josh would come to their house, he would lie on the bed and simply watch Molly. Not talking, not doing anything, just watching, tracking her movements around the room. At the time, Jo chalked it up to young love. Looking back, she would describe it as an early sign of something compulsive and obsessive. If Molly was texting someone, Josh would lean over to see the screen. If she mentioned going out without him, he would either insist on coming along or flood her with questions about who she would be with and when she would be back. When Molly pushed back, he would reframe it as love. I just miss you. I worry because I care about you. The language of concern used to justify control. What Molly did not know, what she had no way of knowing, was that Joshua Stimpson had done this before. In 2013, when Josh was around 21, he began pursuing a woman named Alexandra Dale after meeting her online. He was intensely possessive from the start. He told her not to speak to other men, including her male friends. He followed her without her knowledge. Appearing at places she frequented, he took photographs of her in secret and later confronted her with them, accusing her of flirting or dressing to attract attention. On one occasion, Alexandra received a photograph of her own garden, taken from outside at night. She had never told Josh where she lived. He had found her address, driven there, and taken that photograph as a message. I know where you are. I'm watching. He sent a message telling her he was going to cause her serious harm if she did not comply with his demands. Alexandra reported him to police 3 times. Officers spoke to Josh. The messages stopped, and no formal charges were filed. No lasting record was kept. Not long after, he began a brief relationship with a woman named Leah Hubbard. She ended it because of his behavior. One night at a club in Maidstone, Josh became enraged and threw a drink at her before being removed by security. But when Leah and her friends finally left the venue, at around 5 in the morning, he was waiting outside. He had been standing there for hours. On another occasion, after she had cut off contact, Leah woke at 2 a.m. to tapping on her ground floor window. It was Josh. He claimed his phone had died and asked if he could come inside to charge it. She threatened to call the police. He left. Only then did he back off. 2 women frightened enough to involve the police, 3 formal reports, and nothing on file. No criminal record, no risk flag, nothing that would surface when Molly later sought help. Through late 2016 and into early 2017, the relationship continued. On the surface, things looked ordinary. But Molly's friends and family were beginning to notice a shift in her. She confided to her mom that she felt bored and restless. The clinginess had worn her down. Josh bombarded her with messages whenever they were apart. What are you doing? Who are you with? When will you be free? To the point where she could barely study or spend an evening with girlfriends without him demanding her attention or arriving unannounced. In April 2017, the couple had their first serious argument. Molly discovered that Josh had been secretly filming her during some of their time together, recording her on his phone without her knowledge or consent. When she confronted him, he said he wanted evidence in case they ever had a disagreement about what had been said. The logic didn't hold. What it revealed was a man who was already anticipating conflict, already preparing for some kind of reckoning. Shortly after, Molly went on holiday to Tenerife with her girlfriends. Even abroad, she couldn't escape him. He sent a constant stream of messages, pleading, passive-aggressive, needy. I miss you so much. I guess you're too busy for me now. By the time she returned to England, her mind was made up. She had no feelings left for Josh. The attraction and affection had been worn away entirely. On June 17, 2017, Molly McLaren ended the 7-month relationship. She did it in person in Maidstone, as calmly and firmly as she could. She told him it wasn't working and that she didn't want to be together anymore. Josh wasn't loud or violent, but he was clearly angry. He later complained that she could have done it in a more respectful way. Molly's private response was simple frustration. She knew there was no version of that conversation he would have accepted gracefully. She was right. What followed proved she was right. Within days of the breakup, Josh's behavior moved from heartbroken to threatening. He sent Molly a barrage of messages, pleading for another chance, blaming her for his misery, making remarks that hovered at the edge of violence. You'll regret this. If you think you can treat me like this, you have another thing coming. On social media, it escalated further. Josh began posting derogatory content about Molly on Facebook, visible to friends, family, classmates, anyone in her life. In one particularly damaging post, he publicly accused her of taking cocaine, with no basis in truth, a calculated attempt to destroy her reputation. Molly reported the posts to Facebook. They stayed up. Josh then posted a message saying, "There's more to come." Friends grew frightened for her. Molly was frightened too. She knew that her parents were about to leave for a 2-week holiday, which meant she would be home alone. The thought of Josh knowing that was deeply unsettling. On June 22nd, just 5 days after the breakup, Molly and her mother went to the police. Molly brought printed screenshots of his social media posts and told officers she was in fear of what Josh might do. The police took it seriously enough to act immediately, but their response was inadequate in ways that would later haunt everyone involved. A police officer called Josh on speakerphone in Molly's presence and issued him a verbal warning. The tone was firm but almost casual, as though scolding a teenager for bad behavior. The officer told him they wouldn't want Molly having to come to the police station again, would they? Josh's reply came back cold and brief. Wouldn't we? He agreed to delete the Facebook posts. No formal order was issued. No arrest was made. The police treated it as a harassment complaint, gave him a verbal warning, and hoped that would be enough. It was not enough. What none of them knew yet was that the day before that call, on June 21st, 3 days after the breakup, Josh had driven to an Asda supermarket in Chatham and purchased a large kitchen knife. CCTV from the store later showed him buying it at around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. About 30 minutes later, he drove to a nearby home-based store and bought a pickaxe. He put both items in his car and kept them there. In the weeks that followed, Molly tried to rebuild some sense of normality while remaining alert. She had blocked Josh on social media and cut off direct contact, but he found ways to track her movement through mutual contacts, through what she posted publicly, and through showing up in places she frequented. On June 27th, 2 days before the murder, Molly went to a pub in Rochester with a group of friends. During the evening, Josh walked in. He wasn't alone. He had brought someone with him, apparently a new date, in what seemed like a transparent attempt to provoke a reaction from Molly or make her jealous. He didn't approach her or speak to her. Instead, he positioned himself in the courtyard and spent the evening watching her through the window. For hours. He did not take his eyes off her. Molly tried to laugh it off with her friends to show she wasn't rattled. Inside, she was. When she got home that night, she told her mother what had happened. Joe and Doug McLaren had already reached the point where fear for their daughter was constant. They distributed photos of Josh to their neighbors and asked them to watch for him near the house. The family had no idea how little time they had left. The very next day, June 28th, police contacted Josh for a second time and warned him again to leave Molly alone. He gave no outward reaction. Behind that calm, he was already committed to what was going to happen. Thursday, June 29th, 2017 began like any other day for Molly. She planned to go to the Pure Gym at Chatham Dockside for a workout. She also needed footage of herself performing exercises for a university assignment, 2 tasks she could combine in one visit. Before heading out, she messaged her friend Amy and mentioned that Josh had been quiet for the moment, though she was staying vigilant. At around 10 a.m., she told her mother she was leaving. Joe told her to be careful. She said she loved her. Molly walked out the door. She arrived at the gym around 10 a.m. and swiped in with her membership card. The space was relatively quiet. A weekday late morning, the way she preferred it. She went upstairs to the open-plan fitness studio, picked a spot, and began her routine. She had the room to herself for a few minutes. CCTV footage later showed Joshua Stimson entering the gym shortly after Molly did. He carried a sports bag. He signed in at the front desk and went upstairs. When he found her in the studio, he picked up an exercise mat and placed it directly next to hers. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence was the message. Molly turned to him and asked, "Are you following me now?" He didn't answer. She didn't wait. She packed up her things and walked out of the studio. As she descended the stairs, she sent a text to her mother. "Mom, he's turned up at the gym and come next to me." Joe called immediately. In a hushed, urgent voice, Molly said Josh had appeared beside her and she was scared. Joe told her what any mother would: leave now, come straight home. Molly hung up and began messaging her friends. She went down to the car park. It was approaching 11 a.m. She got into the driver's seat of her car and sat for a moment, messaging back and forth, updating her friends, reading Amy's replies telling her to get out immediately. She typed back that she was already on her way. She didn't notice that Josh had not stayed in the gym. He had gone back to his own car, which was parked a few spaces away in the same lot. From inside it, he retrieved the knife, the one he had bought 8 days earlier. He got back behind the wheel and waited. Molly was still messaging when he made his move. He drove his car the short distance to hers and parked it directly alongside, boxing her in. Before she could register what was happening, he was out of his car and at her door. A witness who knew Molly and happened to be in the car park described what they saw. Josh walked quickly toward Molly's car, yanked the driver's side door open, and Molly started screaming. The attack lasted less than 2 minutes. He stabbed her 75 times, targeting her neck, throat, and head. Bystanders ran toward the car. One man grabbed Josh and tried to pull him back. Josh shrugged him off. The man ran around to the passenger side and slammed the car door onto Josh's leg. It didn't slow him down. He was unreachable. Fueled by something that witnesses could not find words for afterward. When it was over, Josh stepped back. He dropped the knife. He looked down at what had happened. His white shirt was soaked through. He didn't run. He paced a short distance beside the car, then stood still. Police arrived within 3 minutes of the emergency call. Body cam footage showed him standing in the car park, blood-covered, calm. As 2 officers approached him with tasers raised, he said, "You want me?" Not a question. A statement. He raised his hands and offered no resistance as they put him on the ground and handcuffed him. At 11:12 a.m. on June 29th, 2017, Molly McLaren was pronounced dead at the scene. She was 23 years old. When a local news report mentioned that a 23-year-old woman had been killed at Chatham Dockside, one of Molly's close friends immediately messaged Joe to ask if everything was okay. Joe tried calling Molly's phone. No answer. She rushed to the nearest police contact point she knew and was shortly after driven home, where two officers sat her down and told her what she already feared. Doug McLaren was on an offshore drilling platform roughly 100 miles off the coast of Senegal when his wife reached him by phone. He was overcome. He said later that he remained in a kind of stunned disbelief even as police met him at Heathrow when he finally landed, that it was only when he arrived home that the reality fully broke over him. Tom, Molly's brother, rushed back from wherever he was. The family's world had collapsed. In the days after her death, the community responded with an outpouring of grief that went well beyond what any of them had expected. Flowers, notes, and photographs piled up outside Molly's home. Social media filled with messages. Vigils were held, and almost immediately, alongside the grief, came anger. A specific kind of anger directed at the circumstances of her death. Molly had done everything right. She had ended the relationship clearly. She had told her family and friends what was happening. She had reported the behavior to Facebook and to the police twice. She had documented the messages and the threats. She had done precisely what society tells victims of stalking and coercive control to do. And still she was dead. Joshua Stimson was charged with murder almost immediately after his arrest. Given that he had been caught at the scene by multiple witnesses and caught on camera, there was never any question about who had killed Molly. His strategy was not to deny the killing, but to argue that he was not legally responsible for murder. He entered a plea of not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The trial opened at Maidstone Crown Court in January 2018. The prosecution laid out its case plainly. There was no dispute, they told the jury, that Stimson had killed Molly McLaren. The question before the court was whether his mental state had diminished his responsibility to the point where a murder verdict was not appropriate. The prosecution argued that everything about his actions pointed in the opposite direction, that his behavior was organized, calculated, and deliberate. He had bought the knife 8 days before the murder. He had tracked Molly's movements. He had followed her into the gym, positioned himself next to her, waited for her to leave, retrieved the knife from his car, and blocked her vehicle before she could drive away. None of that, they argued, was the behavior of a man who had lost control. It was the behavior of a man who had made a plan and carried it out. To drive the point home, the prosecution called Alexandra Dale and Leah Hubbard, the two women Josh had stalked years earlier, to the stand. Both testified in detail about the frightening behavior he had shown them. Alexandra described finding the photograph of her own garden. Leah described him waiting outside the nightclub for 5 hours in the middle of the night, and the 2 a.m. appearance at her window. Their testimony established a pattern, a long documented history of obsessive and dangerous behavior toward women who tried to leave him. It was not a snap. It was not a breakdown. It was a continuation. Friends and family members testified about the weeks leading up to Molly's death. Her final messages were read aloud in court, the texts to her mother about Josh appearing at the gym, the WhatsApp exchanges with Amy about getting out immediately, the quiet, steady fear that had come to define her last weeks of life. When Joe McLaren's voice broke as she recounted her last phone call with her daughter, many in the courtroom wept. For the defense, the task was to show that Josh's mental state, specifically what they described as a form of personality disorder with an extreme sensitivity to rejection, had substantially impaired his ability to control himself. A defense psychiatrist testified that the abandonment Josh had experienced in childhood had left him with a disordered response to the threat of being left, and that under extreme emotional stress his capacity for self-regulation had failed. But even that psychiatrist, under cross-examination, had to concede that Josh had understood what he was doing. He knew right from wrong. His actions were highly organized and deliberate. The diminished responsibility argument required something the evidence simply couldn't supply. Joshua Stimson did not take the stand. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They returned a unanimous verdict, guilty of murder. Stimson showed no emotion. He stood in the dock looking at nothing in particular, his face expressionless, the same face that witnesses had described in the car park after the attack. In the public gallery, Molly's family wept and held each other. There were shouts of relief from among her friends. And then the room quieted for sentencing. The judge, Adele Williams, addressed Stimson directly before delivering the sentence. She described his actions as cruel, cowardly, and wicked. She told him he had set out to punish Molly for ending the relationship. She told him his attack had been premeditated and planned. She told him, "You are supremely selfish and callous. You intended to kill her. You were determined to seek revenge." Then she sentenced him to life in prison with a minimum term of 26 years. He will not be eligible for any parole consideration until January 2044, when he will be in his mid-50s. Even then, release is not guaranteed. Outside the court, Joe McLaren stood before reporters and said through tears, "We love you, Molly." The McLaren family did not retreat from the world. They transformed their grief into something active. In 2017, they established the Molly McLaren Foundation, built around one of the aspects of Molly's life that had meant the most to her, helping people who struggle with eating disorders as she had. The foundation began raising funds to provide long-term therapy for young people with these conditions. Over the years, it has helped fund treatment for dozens of individuals and supported their families through the process. Every year, around Molly's birthday, her friends and family hold Molly Fest, a music festival that celebrates her life and raises money for the foundation. It has grown larger each year, drawing people who knew Molly and people who only heard her story afterward. The McLarens also became outspoken public voices on stalking and domestic abuse, not to place blame on individual police officers, but to push for systemic reform. They called for stalking, including digital stalking, persistent messaging, and unwanted contact, to be treated with the same seriousness as physical violence, because so often it is the direct precursor to it. The police, for their part, referred themselves to the Independent Office for Police Conduct to review how they had handled Molly's case. An internal domestic homicide review was also conducted. Officers who had dealt with Josh noted that they had warned him twice, and that they had no legal mechanism at the time to do more than issue a verbal warning. That was true, and it was exactly the problem. A joint report published in 2017 examined 112 stalking cases across England and Wales and found that not a single one, had been handled correctly. A super complaint filed by the Susie Lamplugh Trust in 2022 led to a joint investigation that concluded in 2024, with a formal recommendation that stalking legislation be revised. In December 2024, the UK government announced expanded powers for stalking protection orders, allowing courts to impose them directly at conviction. In late 2025, an independent legal review led by Richard Wright KC was launched to examine whether the current statutory definition of stalking is broad enough to protect victims, particularly as stalking increasingly occurs through digital means. That review is expected to conclude in 2026. 1 in 5 women and around 1 in 10 men will experience stalking during their lifetime. A recent study found that 94% of femicide cases had stalking in their history before the killing. Only 5% of stalking reports to the police result in a charge. Molly McLaren reported her stalker twice. She was 23 years old. She had survived an eating disorder, rebuilt her confidence, started a blog to help other people do the same, and was on her way to a degree and a career she had chosen with care. She loved music and festivals and her friends and her mom and dad and her brother. She hugged her mother before bed. She cheered Tom on in everything he did. She wanted to work in health and fitness and make people feel less alone in their struggles. She did everything right. She deserves to be remembered for who she was, not only for what was done to her. And her name deserves to be attached to something more than a tragedy. It is. The foundation bearing her name is still running. The conversation her death started is still going. The law is slowly, imperfectly, but actually changing. If you are experiencing stalking or feel unsafe because of a current or former partner, please reach out. In the UK, the National Stalking Helpline is available at 0808 802 0300. In other countries, local crisis and domestic abuse services are searchable at thehotline.org or through your national emergency services. Molly's family have said they do not want anyone else to suffer what they have. Neither should we.